It's strange how certain nights never leave you. They stay with you stitched into the fabric of your memory, and sometimes even years later, they feel as real as the day they happened. This story takes place in the early 1990s, in a remote corner of Quebec, Canada. Picture a small village buried in deep snow, the kind of place where silence rules the nights, and the only sound you hear is the wind blowing across the fields. Our family lived a couple of miles outside of that village, in a house surrounded by farmland and forest. There weren't many neighbors around, and once night fell, the world felt incredibly still, like the whole earth had gone to sleep. I was a child back then, just 1 year old. My brothers were 3 and 6. At that age, the world feels safe, because you don't know yet what dangers exist. You think your house, your family, and the warmth of your bed are enough to keep anything bad away. But one winter night, our little world was shaken in a way that none of us could ever forget. It was the middle of a bitterly cold night, the kind of cold where even the air feels sharp in your lungs. The kind of cold where if you stepped outside, without a coat, you wouldn't last long. Snow covered everything, and the roads were icy and dangerous. Most people would stay inside, close to their fireplaces, hoping the storm would pass by morning. Inside our house, it was quiet. My brothers and I were asleep, tucked under heavy blankets while my parents rested in their room. But suddenly, without warning, someone entered our home. Imagine this. You're in the middle of nowhere, your house is surrounded by darkness and snow, and in the dead of night, the door creaks open. A stranger steps inside. No knocking, no call for help. Just footsteps, slow, heavy, uneven. This man walked through our house muttering to himself, words half-formed, his voice low and cracked. My father woke up to the sound. At first he thought maybe it was the wind or maybe the house settling in the cold. But then he realized it was a voice, an unfamiliar voice. He got out of bed, his heart pounding, and made his way to the living room. That's when he saw him. Standing there in the dim light was a man who looked like something pulled straight from a nightmare. His face, or rather what was left of it, didn't look human anymore. His scalp had slipped down in front of his face, and to my father's eyes it was as if this man had no face at all. His skin was pale and frozen, his body stiff from the cold, and yet somehow he was still moving, still talking to himself. Over and over he whispered in French, "Je vais mourir, je vais mourir." I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Just imagine being in my father's place. In the middle of the night, you walk into your living room and a half-frozen stranger, bleeding, muttering about his own death, is standing there in your home. My father didn't know if he was dangerous, if he was armed, if he was even alive in the way we understand it. For a split second, he thought he was seeing some kind of ghost, but then reality sank in. This was a man, a broken, injured man who had stumbled into our home because he had nowhere else to go. Later, we learned the full story. Earlier that night, this man and his friend had been driving along the icy roads near our house. They had been drinking, and their car lost control on the frozen surface. It crashed about a mile away. His friend died instantly in the accident, but he survived. Barely. He was thrown from the vehicle, his head injured so badly that his scalp peeled forward over his face. Disoriented, drunk, and freezing, he had wandered through the dark night until he saw the faint outline of our house. Somehow, through sheer willpower or maybe just blind instinct, he had made it to our door. But standing in front of my father, he was not the image of a man fighting for life. He looked more like death itself. His words were broken, his movements unsteady, his body shaking violently from the cold. My father's first instinct was fear, not just for himself but for us, his wife and his 3 children asleep in their rooms. He didn't know if this man would lash out, if he was violent, or if he was too far gone to understand what he was doing. But my father also knew something else. If he didn't act quickly, this man was going to die. So he took a breath, steadied himself, and spoke to the stranger. "Sit down," he said, keeping his voice firm but calm. "You're hurt. I'll help you." The man didn't really respond, but he let himself sink into a chair, still muttering under his breath, still saying over and over, I'm going to die." His hands trembled, his lips were blue and frost clung to his clothes. My father hurried to grab blankets, wrapping them around the man, trying to bring some warmth back into his frozen body. He could see the injury on his head, gruesome, almost unwatchable, and yet he forced himself not to look away. He turned to my mother and told her to stay with us kids, to keep us asleep no matter what. He didn't want us to see what was happening. To this day, my father still says he thanks God that none of us woke up, but he knew blankets wouldn't be enough. If this man stayed in our house, he'd bleed out or freeze before morning. The nearest hospital was about 25 kilometers away, around 15 miles, and on icy winter roads, that was no small journey. Still, it was his only chance, so my father made a decision. He helped the man back to his feet, supported his weight, and led him outside into the frigid night. The snow crunched beneath their boots and the cold wind bit at their skin. He helped him into our car, wrapped him tighter in blankets, and started the engine. That drive was long. Every minute felt like an hour. The car slid here and there on patches of ice, and my father had to fight to keep control. The man kept mumbling from the passenger seat, fading in and out of consciousness, sometimes repeating his phrase, sometimes going quiet in a way that made my father fear he had died. But finally, after what felt like forever, they pulled into the hospital. Nurses and doctors rushed out as soon as they saw him. They didn't waste a second. They whisked him away into the emergency room, leaving my father standing there in shock, his clothes stained with another man's blood, his hands still trembling from the drive. Hours later, the doctors came out and gave him the news. The man had survived. As terrible as his injuries were, the freezing cold might have actually saved his life by slowing down the bleeding. If he had been somewhere warmer, he might not have lasted long enough to make it to the hospital. It's strange to think that something as brutal as winter, something that kills so easily, ended up giving him just enough time to be saved. My father drove home that morning as the sun was rising. The snow glowed orange in the early light, and the house looked peaceful again, as if nothing had happened. Inside, my mother and us kids were still asleep. We never saw the stranger. We never heard the sounds of that night. But for my father, that night never left him. Even decades later, he still talks about it with a kind of haunted awe. He remembers the look of that man, the sight of him standing in our living room with his face covered in frozen skin, the words he repeated over and over, "I'm going to die." And he remembers how lucky we were, that we stayed asleep, that the man wasn't violent, that the night ended with life instead of death. To this day, he calls it both the most terrifying and the most miraculous night of his life. Terrifying, because for a moment, it felt like death itself had walked into our home. Miraculous because somehow, against all odds, that man survived. And maybe the strangest part of all is this. If our house had been just a little farther from the village, if that man had collapsed in the snow before reaching us, or if my father had decided not to help, he wouldn't have made it. His life was hanging by the thinnest thread, and somehow, by chance or fate or divine intervention, that thread didn't break. That night remains a reminder of how fragile life can be, how quickly it can be taken away, and how sometimes survival comes down to the smallest decisions. A man lived because he knocked on the right door, and we slept through the night, never knowing how close we came to waking up to something far worse. So when my father looks back, he still shudders at the memory. But he also gives thanks. Thanks that he woke up when he did. Thanks that he had the courage to act. And thanks that we, 3 children sleeping in our beds, never saw the horror that wandered into our home that night. Because some memories are better left unseen. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe and follow the channel True Threads for more real stories brought to life.